Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nati Teller. I will be taking you guys through chapter 14, which is the treatment of uncertainty and risk in decision making. Exactly what we'll be looking at this afternoon. If you were to just rewind and go back to chapter 5 and chapter 6 of your textbook, if you go back to P1 and you just think about what we covered in chapter 5, chapter 6 and chapter 7, we're focusing on short-term decision making. And as you progress to P2, you'll be introduced now to long-term decision making. In those chapters, what we do as an organization, we do a lot of forecasting about what is likely to be the cash flow in the future. And given that cash flow that we may have projected as an organization, then we ask ourselves, how confident are we in the cash flow that we have projected? And how risky our assumption? How confident are we in our assumptions? And then we find ourselves then moving to ask a very important question, to say, if I have projected that next year I'm going to be generating 1,000 Rand in revenue, how confident I am that this revenue is going to be achieved? Am I 50% confident? Or am I 80% confident? Or I'm 100% confident? Therefore, if we are 50% confident that the 1,000 Rand will actually be achieved, then we're saying the best thing that we can do whenever we're doing a forecast is to use 500 Rand, which is 1,000 multiplied by 50%. However, if we are 80% confident, then we're saying we must take 1,000 multiplied by 80%. By so doing, we are factoring the level of confidence into the cash flow forecast that we have done. Therefore, in chapter 14, there are quite a number of things that we'll be actually looking at. Number one, we need to look at how do we factor risk into decision making. Number two, we want to assess the different types of attitudes that some of our managers that are in charge of making decisions will have. What type of attitude do these people have? We'll also look at the value of information. We're saying if you have information, you will be in a privileged position compared to somebody who doesn't have information. And then we'll move to look at decision criteria as well as decision tree. Then if we go back to what we've just been talking to and then reflect on the introduction, which then provides us with the content and the context in which we'll be looking at risk and uncertainty. Okay? Number one is saying the next few chapters will explore some decision-making problems, such as whether to launch new products, whether to buy a machine, choosing between products. We've already explored some of these elements in chapter 6, where we said, do we source a product or a component externally, or do we make it internally? But other decisions that will need to be made by the management team of any organization, it involves or revolves around whether we need to launch a new product or we don't have to launch a new product. Another decision that we may need to make, it's around whether we should reduce the amount of dividends that we're declaring or we should increase. Sometimes when organizations are faced with so much pressure, then they will obviously consider reducing dividends or not paying dividends at all. But if the management team is considering reducing dividends, one of the key risks that they face, or another uncertainty that they will face, is what will be the reaction of the share price? Will the share price drop by the same percentage in which the organization will be reducing the dividends? or it will go worse than the percentage that we'll be using to reduce the dividends. That's uncertainty. Therefore, management teams need to make decisions in the context of an uncertain environment. We are just trying to paint the picture and provide you with the context in which we need to consider risk and uncertainty when it comes to decision making. Therefore, what we want to do right now is to provide you with an explanation of what risk and uncertainty actually are. How do I define risk and how does it differ from uncertainty? Therefore, number one, we're saying risk, it's defined as follows. It's what may actually go wrong. Risk, it's what stands between you and your objectives. Your objective is to increase your revenue from 1,000 rand in 2016. In 2016 you had 1,000 rand. Therefore now for 2017 you want your revenue to be 5,000 rand. What is it that will stop you or will stand on your way from achieving your set objective? That which will stop you from realizing your objective is known as a risk. Are you guys with me? Therefore, it's very important then that you fully understand what risk is. And quite often then, we will need to measure risk by applying probabilities. Therefore, we say the probability of us achieving 5,000 rand is only 60%. Which means the organization then is likely to achieve 3,000 rand. Because we must take now 5,000 multiplied by 60%, which means the probability of us achieving the 5,000 is 60%. Therefore, multiply 60% with 5,000, it will give you 3,000. That is what you are likely to achieve. But these probabilities that we are talking about are based on historical information. We will say, based on our experience, we have launched a similar product in the past, and this is how the market responded to the launch of the new product. Whereas, if you are looking or you are talking about uncertainty, we're saying we have no experience of how the market will respond to the product launch. Therefore now, when it comes to uncertainty, you will not be able to apply probabilities. Therefore, that's the difference between risk and uncertainties. With risk, you have probabilities that you will assign to an event or to an activity. But with uncertainty, you're not going to have those probabilities. Therefore, what then we want to calculate when we are applying probabilities? We want to calculate what is known as an expected value. What is expected value then? We're saying an expected value, it is the long run weighted average of all the possible outcomes that are likely to happen in the future. Therefore, expected value then, what it does, it summarizes all the different possible outcomes by calculating a single weighted average value. And how do we go about applying or calculating expected value? The way we will calculate expected value, there is a formula which then is presented as expected value is equals to the sum of your probability multiplied by future outcome. Therefore, we say expected value, it is the sum of all probabilities, multiply them by your possible outcome. Therefore, let me give you an example. If we are considering launching a new campus in Witbank, we will say based on history, there is a 20% probability that there will be 50 students that will join IMAS. But there is a 60% probability that there will be 100 students that will join IMAS. And the remaining 20%, there is also a 20% probability that actually will have 200 students in Wheatbank. Therefore, what we're saying, number one, you need to take the probability, multiply it by the possible outcome. The possible outcome here is 50. If we will say 20%, which is the probability, multiplied by 50%, then how much are we going to get? You're going to get 10 students. Number two, 60% probability multiplied by 100 students, that is the possible outcome. Therefore, that will give us 60 students. And then there's a 20% probability that we will have 200 students. Therefore, we're saying the outcome is going to be 40%. Then go back to your formula. Your formula said expected value is calculated as the sum of the probability multiplied by your possible outcome. Therefore, now it means we must add the 10 plus 60 plus 40, which gives us now our expected value as 110. That's very important. That's how we calculate our expected value. Are we comfortable? Awesome. Just to wrap up, that 110 that we calculated then is what we will call or refer to as your long run weighted average. Is what you are likely to have if you were to launch a campus in Wheatbank, and that is very important. Second example, we are having an organization that is contemplating launching a new product. However, this organization will only launch a new product if the expected value of the total revenue will be in excess of $1,000. This organization has decided to set the price of this new product at $10. After some investigation, a number of probabilities for different levels of sales revenue are predicted and are shown as follows. You are likely to sell 80 units. If the price is $10, then 80 multiplied by $10 is going to give you 800. 100 multiplied by 10, it's going to give you 1,000. And then 120 multiplied by 10 is going to give you 1,200. But what you need then to understand is that for every single option that you've been given, there is a probability assigned to that particular option. The first option, we said you are likely going to sell 80 units, generate a revenue of 800, and the probability of that happening, it is 15%. Therefore, take your 15%, multiply by the $800, and you're going to get 120. That is the possible outcome. Okay? The second one, you will take 50%, multiply by $1,000. And what is that going to give you? That is going to give you 500 in terms of the possible revenue that you're going to generate. And then lastly, you're going to take 35%, multiply by $1,200, and that will give you 420. Because we said expected value, it is equals to the sum of the probability multiplied by the possible outcome. Therefore, now let's sum what we've already calculated. 120 plus 500 plus 420, it's going to give us what? A revenue of 1040. That's how we do it. Therefore, what is expected value? We're saying it is the weighted average of the possible outcomes, is what we are likely to achieve in the long term. Are you guys with me? That is very important. Then now, if you look at what we've presented on the slides, we're saying in preparing forecast and making decisions, management may proceed on the assumption that it can expect sales revenue of $10.40 if it sets a selling price of $10 per unit. The actual outcome of adopting the selling price may be sales revenue that is higher or lower than the $10.40. Why are we saying that? There's a 15% likelihood or probability that we can only generate 800. But also, there's a 35% probability that we will generate 1,200. And hence, then we are saying, what is more likely? It's a plus minus 1040. It's not 1040. Can either generate 800, 1,000, and 1,200. That's what you are likely to generate. And hence then we're saying the 1040 is not even the most likely outcome. The most likely outcome is 1,000 because the probability is 50%. That's what is most likely to happen. Are you guys with me? Most likely because of the probability of 50. What is it that you are most likely to achieve when you are considering the probability? Is it something that has a 15% chance or something that has a 50% chance? You have a bigger chance of getting 1,000, and hence we say what is most likely is to get 1,000. Okay, if you don't get it, feel free to give me a shout. Okay? The second example that we want to consider, it's an example where they say a company has identified 4 possible outcomes from a new marketing strategy as follows. Outcome A is likely to give you a profit, or they're saying option A is going to give you a profit of $100,000, but the probability of that happening is only 10%. Therefore, what is the chance of getting 100,000? It's only 10%. Then option B, 70,000 will be the profit, but the chance, the probability of getting 70,000 is only 40%. Option C, there's 50,000 profit, but the chance of achieving that is only 30%. The last option, which is option D, we are likely to make a loss of 20,000. And the chance or the probability of making a loss of 20,000 is only 20%. Then now what we need to do is to calculate the expected outcome of this strategy. Therefore, what we're going to do now, we're going to take the possible outcome of each option multiplied by its probability. Therefore, 100,000 multiplied by 10% will give you 10,000. 70,000 multiplied by 40%, therefore that will give you 28,000. Then 50,000 multiplied by a 30% probability, that will give you 15,000. Then lastly, option D, it's a negative 20,000 multiplied by 20%. Therefore, that is going to give you negative 4,000. Therefore, if you sum all of these to get your expected value, then now we've got to add. It's 10 plus 28 plus 15 minus 4. Therefore, the expected value of this strategy will be $49,000. That is the long run weighted average profit of each of the possible outcomes. Which mean in the long term, we're saying if this scenario keeps on repeating itself, the organization is likely to make 49,000. But it's very important that I repeat the same point that I made when we're doing example 1. We're saying this is the weighted average. But what is likely to happen? It's one of these 4 possible outcomes, which means we are likely to make a loss of 20,000 or to make the highest profit of 100,000. These are likely outcomes. Then if the question says to you, what is the most likely? You look for the possible outcome that is attached to the highest probability, which in this case, the highest probability is 40%, which means what we are most likely to make, it is 70,000. But the 49, it is the average of all the possible outcome multiplied by their probability. Are you guys with me? That's very important. Here is a previous exam question that we'll need to consider to test if you guys fully understand this concept of probabilities or of calculating your expected value. If you look at this question, okay, it was written in November 2013. Therefore, let's read the required first. They say prepare a payoff table showing the profits for production quantities of 40,000 tons, 60,000 tons, and 80,000 tons. Number one, what we want to explain to you before we get into the details of this question is what is a payoff table? What is a payoff table? If you go to your textbook, in chapter 14, if you are doing P1, however, if you are doing P2, the chapter for risk and uncertainty, it is chapter 12. Therefore now let's start by looking at chapter 14 of P1, because the very same concept, it is presented in both P1 and P2. And the content that is covered is exactly the same. Therefore, if you are doing P2 and you're watching this video, don't worry. Therefore, if you go to your textbook, if you look at section 4 of your risk and uncertainty chapter, you'll find on section 4, we're talking about payoff tables and decision criteria. What then are we saying there? We're saying when evaluating alternative courses of action, management's decision will often depend upon their attitude towards the risk. To consider the risk borne by each alternative, it is necessary to consider all the different possible profits or loss that may arise. Therefore, a payoff table is simply a table that illustrates all possible profits and losses. Now that we have explained the payoff table, I would like us to look at an example. We're going to look at a past exam paper that was written in November 2013. What you are asked to do, they're saying you are required to prepare a payoff table showing the profits for production quantities of 40,000 tons, 60,000 tons, and 80,000 tons. They are saying you need to prepare the payoff table. But before then, we can look at how are we going to prepare a payoff table. Let's read what the question says. They're saying a company produces grit for use on public roads during icy conditions. The grit has to be produced in advance of the winter season. The level of demand depends on weather conditions. Any excess production has to be disposed of as it will deteriorate before the following winter. The company has received the following weather predictions and associated demand for next winter. If the weather condition is severe, the demand will be 72,000 tons. However, if the weather is normal, the demand will be 54,000 tons. And if the weather is mild, the demand will be 38,000 tons. The company needs to determine the quantity of grit to produce for the next winter season. It can only produce 40,000, 60,000 or 80,000 tons and cannot change the quantity once production has begun. 1 ton of grit has a selling price of $150 and its associated cost to produce a ton of grit is $70 per ton. Any unsold grit will need to be disposed of at a cost of $20 per ton. Therefore, now what they are asking you, given the demand, given what the organization is able to produce, you've got to present a payoff table, which then will show the different combinations of profits or losses that are likely to be generated by the organization if they are looking at the different permutations. Therefore, now what is happening? We're told that the company can actually produce, okay, in terms of 40,000 could be the one quantity. 40,000 is the quantity. Or the quantity could either be 60,000. And lastly, the quantity could be 80,000. Okay? And then now, we are told that the weather could either be severe, which means if the weather is severe, the demand is going to be 72,000 tons. Okay, 72K, it's 72,000. Okay? Or the weather could be normal. If the weather is normal, what will be the demand? It will be 54,000. Lastly, we're told that the weather could either be mild. And if the weather is mild, the demand will be 38,000. Therefore, given this now, what we need to do is to calculate the profit or the loss that will be generated for each of these combinations. Let me try a different color. Hopefully it works. Oh, it's black. Thought it's red. Okay. Now, if the organization is going to produce 40,000 grit and the demand is severe, which means the demand is 72,000, it means we will not be able to meet the entire demand. But the nice thing is that we're going to sell everything that we produce. Therefore, to calculate the profit, we can simply say 150, which is the selling price, minus the total cost of producing the grit, which is 70. That gives us a profit of $80 per ton. Are you guys comfortable? Therefore, if now the profit is $80 per ton, you can simply say $80 multiplied by what you're going to sell, which is 40,000 units. Therefore, the total profit that the organization is going to make is $3.2 million. $3.2 million. Are you guys comfortable? I'm glad. Now, you come back and say, if we're going to produce 60,000 tons of grit and the demand is severe, then it means we're going to sell everything because we're producing 60 and the demand is 72,000. Therefore, you can simply go back 60,000 tons multiplied by the 80, which is the profit per ton. We've calculated the 80 by saying 150 minus 70. 60,000 tons multiplied by 80. Therefore, that is going to get us 4.8 million. That is the profit we're going to be making. Then we move on. We're saying what happens now if the company produces 80,000 tons of grit and the demand is 72,000. Obviously we're going to sell the entire 72,000, but there will be an excess grit that will be left unsold. And the question said, any unsold grit will have to be disposed of at a cost of $20 per ton. Therefore, what I would like to make you aware of is that the 72,000 tons that we're going to sell, we're going to make a profit of 80. Therefore, the first thing you can do is to take the 72,000 tons that you're going to sell and multiply by the profit of 80. Therefore, we're going to make a profit of 5.76 million. Are you guys with me? And then we are left with the 80. The 80 could be now treated as follows. Remember the 8,000 that is left. We've produced 80. We have sold 72. Therefore, we are left with 8,000 tons. Therefore, what costs are associated with this? It will be number one, the 8,000 multiplied by the cost of producing the grit, which is $70. And also you're going to say 80 multiplied by the cost of disposing of the grit, which is what? Which is 20. Are you guys with me? Therefore, the simpler way of doing this is just to add the 70 plus the 20, you get 90. Therefore, this will be the cost that will always be applied to the unsold grit, because it's the 70 which is the cost associated with producing it, and the 20 which is the cost associated with disposing it. Therefore, always use 90 for any unsold grit. Are you guys with me? Therefore, you can simply say, I have 8,000 tons which are unsold, multiplied by 90. Therefore, the cost, this will be cost now. Okay, this is the cost that you're going to subtract from the profit that you've made. Therefore, you're going to subtract how much? It is 720. Okay, 720. Therefore, the net profit that will be generated then, it is the 5.76 million minus 0.72, okay, which then will give us a profit of 5.04 million. Are you guys with me? It's very important that you are cautious or you are careful in how you treat the unsold grit. There is the cost of making the 8,000, which is the $70. Plus, there is the cost of disposing of the grit that is unsold, which is 20. Therefore, simply add the two, have 90 multiplied by what is unsold, which is 8,000 tons. Then you subtract that from the profit that we've generated from selling the 72,000 tons of grit. Then we continue with our payoff table. Now you move to when the weather is normal. We said then when the weather is normal, the demand will be 54,000. You can just put the demand here, 54,000. Therefore, what happens if we produce 40,000 tons of grit and the demand is 54? It means we're going to sell everything. We won't be able to meet the demand. Therefore, the same amount that we generated here on top, when we sold everything, which is the 3.2 million, is what we'll generate here. Are you guys comfortable? Now, we got the 3.2 by taking the 80, which is the profit, multiplied by the 40,000 which we've produced, because we couldn't meet the demand. Then moving to when we're producing 60,000 tons, then what are we saying there? We're saying if we are producing 60,000 tons and the demand is 54,000. Therefore, we'll only sell 54,000. There will be unsold grit of how much? We're producing 60, the demand is 54. Therefore, what is unsold is 6,000 tons. That's very important. Therefore, the first thing that we must do is to calculate the profit associated with what we have sold, which is the 54,000 tons. Therefore, we're going to take 54,000 tons, multiply by the 80, which is the profit per ton. Therefore, we're getting what? 4.32 million. Therefore, that's the profit, 4.32 million. However, we must now factor in the cost associated with any unsold grit. How much is unsold? It is 6,000 tons. Therefore, we go 6,000 tons multiplied by 90. Remember, the 90 is made up of the 70 of cost and the 20 of the disposal. Okay? Therefore, 6,000 multiplied by 90. Then we're going to get 540 as a loss. Okay? Therefore, we're going to subtract now. Therefore, the net profit after the cost of disposal is 3.78 million. Okay? That's how much we're going to make. We move to when? We're producing 80. How much are we going to sell? We're only going to sell 54,000. That's what we are selling. Therefore, what we have, we'll have obviously the 4.32 million, which is what we calculated here. It's generated by taking the 54,000 tons of grit multiplied by the 80. Okay, that's how we get our 4.32 million. But now, what is unsold grit? They've produced 80,000. We've only sold 54. Therefore, what is unsold is 26,000. Therefore, now we must take the 26,000 of unsold grit multiplied by the 90 to calculate the associated cost. Therefore, 26,000 multiplied by 90. Therefore, that gives us 2.34 million as a cost. 2.34 million. Okay? Therefore, what is the net profit? It is 1.98 million. We're moving along. We say now we are having a mild weather. If we are having a mild weather, it means the demand will only be 38,000, right? 38,000. But we've produced 40,000. It means we're going to only sell 38,000. The 2,000 will be unsold grit. Therefore, let's calculate the profit associated with what we're going to sell, which is 38,000. 38,000 multiplied by 80, which is the profit per ton. Therefore, the profit that we're going to make for what we've sold, it will be 3.04 million. But there's 2,000 of unsold grit. Difference between 40,000 and 38,000. Therefore, how are we going to calculate the unsold part? Therefore, this is what we're going to do. 2,000 multiplied by 90. We know our 90 now. 70 plus the 20. Therefore, that gives us a cost of 180. Okay? Therefore, the overall profit it is 2.86 million. This is a 2.86 million. Okay? Then we move along. We produce 60,000 tons of grit, but we are only going to sell 38. Therefore, the profit that we'll make on the 38, it is the 3.4 million. But what is unsold? the difference between 60,000 minus the 38, it is equals to 22,000. Multiplied by the 90, therefore we're going to make a loss, or the cost associated with making what is unsold and disposing it. It is 1.98 million. That is the cost. We're only going to make a profit of 1.06 million. Is it understandable? Good. Therefore we go to when we produce 80,000. We're still going to sell 38, which means we're going to make 3.04 million. Therefore what will be the cost? The cost now of what is unsold, right? It will be 80,000, that's what we've produced, minus what we've sold, 38. So we're sitting with 42,000 tons of grit that is unsold. Therefore we're going to say 42,000 multiplied by 90. Therefore the cost associated with unsold and disposing grit, it is 3.78 million. For this time around, the cost exceeds the profit from what we've sold. Okay? Therefore, going to say 3.04 minus 3.78. Therefore, we're going to make a loss as a company of 740,000. Are you with me, ladies and gentlemen? Therefore, this now brings us to how we can put together our payoff table. Therefore, if now the question says to you, how much money are we going to make if we sold? Okay? Or if the weather was normal and we've only produced 40,000, you can say it's 3.2 million. Or if the question says, if we had produced 80,000 tons and the weather was normal, which means the demand was 54,000, how much profit are we going to make? You can say 1.98. Because I said to you guys, the payoff table show us the different permutation of profit or loss that the business can make. Are you guys with me? Therefore, I hope then you will be able to do other exercises that are in your book and also in the exam practice kit to put together your payoff table. Thank you. Let's move on to the next section.